All right, so we made it. Last panel of the evening. We heard a lot about very exciting technical, achievements, advancements, shielded transactions. We talked a little bit about the semantics of bridges, if IBC is a bridge or not. But I think for the last panel, we want to bring it back home to some of the more human, political, concerns. So if you don't care about that, if you don't care about humans, if you don't care about society, maybe this panel isn't for you. So I don't know, get a drink, go outside. But personally, I think if we're all here to, build something revolutionary, connect, organizations, people, institutions, then we gotta think about these real hard questions. So the panel is on global communities and multi-chain ecosystems, very broad. So we'll try to narrow it down a little bit with this amazing panel. But before we get started, I have a question for you all. If you can, summarize community in one word, what it means to you, what would that one word be? I'll start, because this was a last-minute request I had of the panelists. I would say it would be love. For me, yeah. So what about you, Spade?
When airdrop.
Those are... All right, okay. I think I know where you're coming from.
I'm going to say communication.
Family.
Values.
Wow, okay. I think that gives us some indications of what our esteemed panelists, I think, care about. So, okay, global communities and multi-chain ecosystems. So, obviously an active and engaged community is a core success indicator of any crypto project. Building a community in a multi-chain ecosystem or multi-chain context, I think poses unique challenges. So can you talk a little bit about how your project, so a few of us are representing validators, others are representing specific projects or app chains. So how does your project approach community building in a multi-chain ecosystem, and what are some of those unique challenges? Maybe Felix, I think you're up first.
I'll start. I'm with Chorus One. We're a multi-chain staking provider essentially. So we've been active in a lot of ecosystems, kind of coming out of the Cosmos ecosystem, of course. So we really from the start embraced this multi-chain vision. I think what we're trying to do to kind of get innovations that are built in one ecosystem, kind of port that over to other ecosystems, and trying to ensure that things that are invented in one place kind of make their way to the other ecosystem, and maybe build like a shared understanding of certain problems and terms, maybe even. So one example would be liquid staking, where a lot of the different networks might have like different staking designs, but in the end they all like maybe work similarly, or like come to they have the same problems. And we're trying to essentially build like a core understanding of what is actually deep down the same about that, and trying to inform the other ecosystems of what we've seen in elsewhere, and trying to like port that over. So I think the challenges that many are facing is that many ecosystems will have this like not invented here syndrome, where they try to like reinvent everything instead of looking like around what others have done. And I think I see us as like a player that will try to don't do that and help people like adopt the right things, Yeah.
Yeah, I think finding common ground is definitely something that we all try to work towards. I'm going to kick it to Sebastian, because a lot of your kind of brand, or what you try to advance, the narrative is around interoperability and this multi-chain vision. So how do you think about some of the challenges of multi-chain ecosystem building and community building?
I mean, with regards to community building, I don't know that it's a problem that's inherent to multi-chain, in the same way that, in the same way that all of the different communities that exist on the internet, can exist and sort of flow into each other when there's value alignment. And when there isn't, well, I mean, they're just like more distant, right? So I think with the multi-chain ecosystem, we're naturally going to see communities, different communities, have proximity when they have shared values, and have more distance when they don't have when they don't share that many values. I think one of the challenges, though, and something that we need to remind ourselves of, and sort of also aligns with what Ethan was saying in his talk yesterday about how we're competing with institutions and traditional sort of power structures, is that all of us here in crypto, whether you're building on the Interchain, or whether you're building on Solana or on Ethereum, or whether you think like Bitcoin is great, our common, I don't want to say enemy, but like the thing that we're combating is, are sort of like these traditional institutions that don't represent, I think, many of the values that we all share, and we sometimes need to just remember that and sort of come back to first principles. And so I see that as like a big challenge.
Hello? I would just love to add to that, because what you said really resonates with me, and it's this idea that we're all part of this exit from the traditional fiat system, right? Like, what are we all here for? And crypto communities, what is a technology good for if not to kind of uplift humanity as a whole? We are all part of this, broader goal, and an ecosystem's moat is really its community. It's the human capital that's behind it. So I'm not actually going to promote any single project within this ecosystem, but rather this idea that we're all this big sovereign family as part of the greater Interchain ecosystem. And at the end of the day, like, based on all of the conversations that you're hearing, based on all of the talks that you've heard at Cosmoverse, you could kind of see that people are building these little tools to make ecosystems even abstracted away at the end of the day, until we basically have this great network of networks, like actually Henry from Penumbra says, into this internet of blockchains. And when we are all migrated over to the internet of blockchains, I think that's when we effectively have exited the fiat system. And that's what we're all kind of building towards.
I would tend to agree. Like, at a very basic level, my view of communities is it's basically a group of people united by either something that they do or something that they believe in common. And I think, like, at various levels, there's the whole crypto community, which is kind of like united in this vision for another model of how we kind of like manage power and money in our society. And then there's kind of like this big underlying idea in Cosmos, which is having separate groups that come together on their own terms and live together, are part of this family, as you say, kind of. So I think like this is kind of like what I think enables us to even like discuss Interchain community, basically. It's because we have this shared idea, this shared vision. I think the way we approach it, like, or at least the way I approach it, when thinking about like how Neutron, which is not to shill it, just for context, is a smart contract platform that focuses on like interoperating with other blockchains. The way I think about
Prop
it,
72, yeah. Huh? Prop 72.
Yeah.
We'll get there. We'll get there.
So, actually, do you want to take this? Because I can make this comment later if you prefer.
No, I mean, I think like considering how projects sort of balance economic incentives with political objectives is actually like what I wanted to talk about. So I think a lot of us would argue or agree that cryptocurrencies and blockchains are inherently political kind of projects, right? So we talk a lot about governance, we talk a lot about consensus, adversarial conditions. At the end of the day, these systems precede us, since we've been intelligent beings. But now, obviously, in 2022, we have technology to mediate these conditions, right? But these conditions are, at the end of the day, inherently political, and the relationships that exist within these systems are obviously human at the end of the day. So technology is just a way to facilitate these things that already exist in the human world. So for your project, obviously these are big, existential questions. But at the end of the day, you have to consider how you balance the political objectives of what your project or your organization is trying to achieve with the economic incentives or the economic objectives of your project. So if we can all agree that there exists a trade-off between the political and the economic, which I hope we can, how does your project approach that trade-off, and how do you think about community building and taking your project to market from that perspective? So a little bit of an intense question, but I think we can all, talk about these trade-offs in a way that is practically motivated. So who wants to take it off first?
I'd like to touch here. So I help co-found an organization in France called ADAN, which is a sort of policy advisory organization that's done tons of work in Europe in the context of the MiCA regulation and all the sort of regulation that's coming down the pipe. And I think it also comes, it does come back down to values, right? So first, yes, crypto is political, and the pushback, the quite intense and violent pushback that we've witnessed in the last year, whether in Europe, in the form of MiCA, or in the US with some of this more recent stuff that I'm not super familiar with, but have had some amount of exposure to, yeah, it is political. But, what organizations like ADAN and others, and as crypto companies, you should all be paying attention to these organizations and funding them if you can, because they're doing really important work. What these organizations try to do is smooth the gradient with regards to this value alignment, and helping policymakers understand that we align. We're actually in alignment on a lot of things. Just our own biases, and maybe even sort of generational, biases that might be also exacerbated by generational differences, prevent us from seeing that we're actually aligning on a lot of things. So, I think that, it just comes back down to values.
I would love for us to almost think of regulations as a secondary thing. I know it matters a lot because they have to provide a framework in which you can operate, but at the same time, I think there's a lot of opportunity right now to figure out DAO tooling and how we could govern ourselves, because the demand is there for us to want to self-govern. We're obviously disgruntled by the way that we are being governed in meat space, and these faraway politicians who are out of touch with what we are talking about are the ones kind of in control of things, and the people who are spinning up DAOs and experimenting there are actually saying that no, we could figure out a better way to govern ourselves. So hopefully we could move away again from this fiat-based system where the incumbents are somewhere so far away we have no means to even talk to them, and they by no means represent us, even though we ostensibly voted for them. So yeah, this whole thing is just a community of people building towards exiting from the traditional system. So even though there are trade-offs right now, and we still have to work within the traditional framework, the idea and the hope, maybe the utopian hope, is that we could finally move away from that, build ourselves out of that system, and they follow us into this new paradigm.
All right. Okay. I think I'm gonna take it a little bit into more practical thing, where, in a way, what we're working towards, I think, is to have this ownership economy type thing where the users of the networks are also the owners. So I think if you want to align that, there is obviously this trade-off where you want to have these early investor VCs, they want to make money and they want to be early, but you also want future users to become owners of the network. So I think there's obviously that kind of like tension between kind of rewarding the early adopters and like not ostracizing late adopters. And I feel if that's basically also the problem that exists in the traditional world where, right, the crony capitalism and like people that are in power like want to keep it. And obviously if you have all the tokens and you're not giving them away, you're going to stay in power in proof of stake essentially. And I think that's one of the big issues, right, that is also like kind of not really solved. And token distribution is a big question mark. I guess we had Bitcoin a little bit like you were able to mine essentially early by nature of not knowing that it would be valuable at some point. Now it's gone back to like, you know, the people that are already in power kind of can keep it by investing early in the projects. Like I guess all of us are like a little bit like guilty of that in a way because we also want to maintain that power. But you know, like so you need to find a way to not or like get a little bit like reverse the dynamic a bit. And I think there should be much more experimentation in that regard. Yeah, I think that what I would say to that.
Yeah, I agree. I think you raise very interesting points. I think to this effect, like perhaps like the low-hanging fruit of how we make the situation a bit better is one, recognize that there are various areas and functions in governance. There's kind of like, you know, the technical parameters of the zone, like let's, you know, change whatever number the blockchain needs to perform a function. There's also kind of like economic parameters which are, you know, pertain to like incentives, funding, be it ongoing on kind of like a one-time thing like a grant or something. And then there's kind of like, you know, the kind of like the soft law space where it's more like, okay, we as a community, we, you know, make these soft law, these standards for ourselves on how we operate and how we want to think about where we're going and what we're doing. And all of these areas kind of have their own trade-offs, and perhaps we can find mechanisms that actually optimize where we want to get for each of these. For example, for soft law stuff, like the rules, like our social contract, I feel it makes little sense to opt for kind of like a traditional, in crypto at least, one token, one vote model, because actually what you want to maximize is the ability of everyone who is a member of that community to be able to express that opinion and have that opinion heard, right? In other matters, for example, like economic matters, you might actually want the opposite, in which you want not to maximize kind of like the fact that everybody has the same weight, but to enable the strength of preference to be expressed. And so like for all of these areas of governance, there are specific trade-offs for all the mechanisms that we implement. And we're kind of like, you know, using this one-size-fits-all kind of like voting mechanism in Cosmos so far. And I do think that there's a lot of improvement to be made by kind of like breaking down these functions, looking at exactly what we're trying to do and optimize for, and then designing the mechanisms that allow us to make decisions efficiently and kind of like according to our objectives in these areas. So that's kind of like the first thing. And then the second thing is also like, you know, ownership. It's you know, it's a state in terms of like, it's a financial state, but it's also kind of like a mental state. Like the idea of I'm contributing to this ownership economy, to the ownership of this blockchain, is not just like, oh, I have the tokens. It's also like, I understand at least like some of how it works, right? I am actively involved in deciding where it goes. And so for this to happen and to be productive and not just like collectively running into a wall, it requires, in my opinion, two things, which is first, education. And by this, I don't mean like a top-down approach where we're going to tell you what it's like and then you just listen to us and that kind of stuff, but it's kind of like we need the information about the project, the vision, how it works, what is the context around us, what is being done in other ecosystems and stuff to be shared as widely as possible so that people can collectively, like the community as a whole can collectively have more refined views over time and make proper decisions. And then the second thing is empowerment. So like over time, as your community matures and people start having tighter relationships, more and more information, and kind of like opinionated views on where you're going as a project and as a community, then you want to give people more and more ability to actually make significant change to the blockchain, the community, the project, basically. So like it can start with very simple things, like recognizing the value of someone's contribution to a community by like with honorific stuff, like even if even a bloody Discord title or a color can sometimes make the difference, because it's like, oh, actually somebody recognized that I've been here, I've been interacting with people, people know that I'm here, that I exist, right? So it's kind of like the real beginning of this kind of thing. But the way I think about this is that there should be this kind of like ownership or leadership, or call it however you want, ladder in your community, which allows people to get gradually more and more involved. And as they do, they kind of prove the fact that, like, one, they're taking initiative, they're engaged in this, they have, at least time at stake. And when they carry out those responsibilities, you can, as a community, learn that these members, deserve some degree of trust, and give them more power, more ability next time, so that over time you're actually incentivizing people to become more proactive, basically, in their engagement in the community and the project. So I think that's kind of like a crucial component of how we drive this kind of like ownership community and system towards somewhere where we're actually, all in control of this ship we're on.
Yeah, I find it very interesting and significant that the discussions around community building ultimately boil down to governance, and you made some really insightful comments and recommendations on some of the things missing in governance, which would maybe lead to stronger community bonds, right? Things like voting preference is something that we don't represent currently, in a significant way, I would argue, when we do Cosmos governance. So I would argue that Cosmos governance, I assume a lot of you would agree, but it's quite primitive. A lot of things have to happen off chain. When it hits, an on-chain, governance proposal, it's still, maybe not the final state. There's still a lot of questions around accountability, around disclosure. So for my last question here, this is something. This is a question I'd like to pose to all of you. What is something that you would like to see represented on-chain from a governance perspective that is currently socialized off-chain, or at least isn't represented in the state very well? So I think, Spade, you gave some really interesting sort of hints at some of those things, but whatever is missing, I think ideally would help to contribute to a stronger sense of community. So think about it from that perspective. It's a bit of a probing question, but I hope you can all come up, see if there's something you think is missing from a governance perspective. What do you guys think?
I'll try to start on it. I don't know if that's completely what you're looking for, what I'm gonna say, but I'll say it anyway. I think. Like we're saying, right, like one token, one vote, this one-size-fits-all approach is not really working that well. I think we're also just seeing not enough governance proposals, maybe even making it on-chain in the first place, or people being like hesitant to even go to that. And very many use cases are not suited to like activate the entire token holdership of like voting on it, where I think the thing that you actually need in a certain way is to build like kind of sub-governance structures in a way that allow you to outsource certain decisions also to like people that are more involved, maybe like in a system like Avril was saying, that people that build up the expertise or like somehow become representatives of a certain area of your project. Let's say it's grants funding, for example, right? That they can make the decision, because like some decisions also need like higher velocity, especially like funding decisions, where you can't like bring every community funding proposal to the community pool, but you actually want more velocity, people that have the expertise to like make some decisions. So I think that's something that would be nice to see. It could just be like also like a proposal where you vote on some committees, I guess, and they are in charge, but then I guess you will need also like systems that prevent capture of these positions, that they can like still be changed and they are based on merit and not necessarily just on whatever power they might have. So I would say that would be nice to see, and I think grants funding is like one of the very obvious ones. I think there's obviously like many more. I think like some of the actual DAOs, if you actually look at people that have been building stuff in this DAO system. I think, I, for my personal experience as part of Lido DAO, have seen like certain structures emerging there that like address that, like distribution of rewards, grants, it's all like security. There are like different people that obviously have like much more knowledge than the average token holder, and how they get into power is probably also the question that you should be addressing, and like creating these systems to allow that to be sustainable and effective in the end, yeah.
Okay, so I'm not going to sit here and pretend like I have all the answers, right? Maybe one of you might have one of these answers, because right now we can all agree that DAO tooling is extremely primitive, and there's only sort of this stake-weighted governance mechanism that could lend itself to a plutocracy. And we haven't really touched on this idea of this, reputation-based mechanism. How would that even look like? Is it going to be peer-to-peer? How do I, ascribe reputation to someone who has high reputation? How do you ascribe? So all of this hasn't yet been explored, but maybe in the future it can. And the power of this technology is something to behold, because it could be something so granular as something like a family setting. If we're in a dinner table setting and I am a parent and I have children, how do we make decisions? Well, the parents make decisions, and if we are a small corporation, maybe you could use DAO tooling to vote on high-level executive decisions. But if you are trying to replace governments, maybe you figure out a sort of democratic way of doing it via representative government, but that isn't necessarily based on how much money you have in a system. So I think all of that has yet to be explored, and we're still very early in the stages of exploring this.
Are you suggesting that validators are the adults and the delegators are children?
No.
Or the other way around?
The validators are the government officials, the representatives, and the delegators are the people who vote on their representative officials.
So I don't have strong opinions about what types of things sort of exist outside of on-chain governance that would need to be brought into on-chain governance, but I do have a thought about governance that. So, we recently started running validators, and I was confronted with this reality that on-chain governance is like a glorified signaling mechanism, and maybe everybody else had already realized this, but I realized this precisely when I had to put an upgrade binary, on my server, on my validator, in order to participate in the chain upgrade. And I realized at that point that, in fact, validators hold all the power when it comes to, basic things like chain upgrades, but whether or not funding proposals actually get submitted on chain. And during the whole Juno drama thing that happened recently, I was also thinking about it then, and considering what would happen if validators got together and decided to go against the governance decisions that had been made on chain. And so I don't know how we fix that, but I do think that at some point in the future, we are going to witness some sort of drama that is going to top all of the governance drama that we've had to witness so far. There's going to be a shitstorm of governance drama coming when the decisions that are being made by delegators through governance go against, perhaps, coming back to values, the values of the validators who run that chain, or the foundations who might have influence over them, or any other sort of misalignment of values. So I'm waiting for that to happen, and I think it's going to be one of those get your popcorn sort of moments.
All right.
Yeah.
Well, on that ominous note, Spade, do you have any final thoughts on this question?
Yeah, I guess my quick 2 cents. I think community as its heart is something that happens in between people, and so like there's only so much that we can put on chain, because sure, like the blockchain is a a network where you can see nodes as people, I guess, but still, like there needs to be some degree of authenticity in the relationships that are built, and so like some of it just, in my opinion, doesn't need to be on chain. What I could see kind of like being on chain and being kind of cool on chain, but that probably has been done a bit, but probably not very well, is kind of like those, well, two things actually, like mechanisms that enable people to take more actions. So like, like community grants, like retroactive community funding and stuff are things that I think are useful. But then also kind of like history / honorific rewards like on the blockchain. So like having your wallet be more than your wallet, but actually being your a representation of the actions and the contributions you've made to that community, I think is pretty interesting in, starting to build that kind of like network of trust of, like I may not know who, like what is the name of that person, but I know that they've been around for a while, and that every time they've interacted with this community and project, they've been very meaningfully adding value. And so I know that their actions are something that I can rely on to kind of like in my understanding of this project and what we're doing as a community. So I guess, yeah, that's my 2 cents.
Awesome. Okay, well, thank you to the panelists for answering some tough questions on community building.
Wait, can I just add a last note to that? Yeah, I would love to add a last note and just zoom out into the bigger picture. There is this tendency to get lost in the weeds, details about like funding and whatever, but the big picture is, and I'm talking 10, 20 years from now, and I want to refer to Balaji's idea of the network state. So for those of you who aren't familiar, the network state is basically a crypto community that is powered by its own crypto coin, and we're kind of this self-governing system. And it's actually, right now, if you look at the market cap of all of crypto, we are the size of a small country. Like we're the size of the GDP of like Latvia. We're like right underneath Latvia. So at the end of the day, in 10, 20 years from now, if we figure out governance, it's basically a tool for us to figure out how to govern our own internet country. So yeah, it's just, if you figure out a reputation-based thing outside of just proof of stake, then it'll be really interesting. And we're not going to only be talking about how to allocate capital to fund this thing. We're going to be talking about how to govern our own network state.
Awesome. Thank you, Chango. Really inspiring. All right. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you.